publicly. So this time.
Okay, so
You guys have fun.
hello and welcome, Christina, to another MQE Career Chat. Before we get started, we want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to speak with us today. Of course, as we all probably heard, Christina is not a stranger to MQE Career Chats. She was hosted and participated last year as well, and so her being here today shows her strong commitment to the University of Pittsburgh, the MQE program, and us as a new generation of economists, up and coming economists and analysts. And so we want to thank you again, and please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit more about what you do at the Urban Institute and maybe even a few fun facts.
Sure. Okay. I'm not sure I have any super fun facts, but I'll try to think of some. So nice to meet you all. My name's Tina Stacy. I still use my maiden name sometimes, but I won't make y'all remember that or say it. It's a tough one. So I've been at Urban for about 8 years. I absolutely love it. I feel very blessed to have a job that I love going to every day. Of course, some days are harder than others, but to have a job where I feel like I get paid to do good in the world, it's very rare. And so I'm very happy to share with you my path for getting here so that I hope you all can find your own dream jobs. It's not a dream job for everybody, but for me, it fits perfectly and I love it. Fun facts about myself. So I went to GISPIA at Pitt, and I originally wanted to do international development work. So I worked abroad for a while and then got to a point in my life where I just wanted to kind of like settle in one spot. So I switched to domestic work and that's how I ended up at the Urban Institute. I'll pause there and let you ask questions.
Yeah, so I guess the first thing we want to get into is what exactly do you do at the Urban Institute and how is that project going? What is it like? Just a little bit more detail about that.
Sure. It would be nice if there was just one project, but I think right now I probably have like 25 to 30 projects going at once. So explaining what we do is kind of tough. I know I always have to try to say this around the Thanksgiving dinner table, like, what do you do again? But I think that's the beauty of it. I get to do a lot of different things. So I'm an economist by training. So all the research I do is, well, it's actually not all kind of econ directly related, but we do funded research around all issues related to equity, inclusion, poverty, those kinds of topics, both in urban and rural areas. The Urban Institute is kind of a misnomer. We do a lot of rural work as well. But so just to give kind of a sample of the types of projects I'm working on, we do some evaluative work. So I'm helping a program, a Boys and Girls Club program in Puerto Rico, evaluate their model to better understand how they can better serve youth in one of the poorest neighborhoods in Puerto Rico, in San Juan. We are helping to evaluate two racial equity focused foundation initiatives, one in Houston, Texas, and one in Baltimore, Maryland, where we're helping a foundation better understand whether or not an initiative that they did to try to better fund Black-led and Black-serving organizations, whether it was successful, whether they reached organizations that really were outside of the loop, and whether those organizations benefited from this new type of investment. So evaluative work like that. We also get to do more kind of technical assistance on the ground. So I'm leading a couple of projects in cities throughout the country to help them think about how to inclusively and equitably recover from COVID-19. We know that when the economy has challenges and places are recovering, they often just try to recover the economy at any cost and don't focus on equity from the beginning. And we know that that can just reinforce decades, centuries of racist policymaking and planning. And so we're really working with cities, cities and states and other types of local governments are about to get and have been getting more money than they've ever seen before through recovery funds. And it's a really unprecedented opportunity to use those funds to try to address the root causes of inequities in our cities, rather than just, putting it into programming as usual and business as usual. So we're trying to help cities where I'm leading an effort in Rochester, New York, and one in Memphis, Tennessee, to try to help a partner there kind of work with the city government and with other organizations to use the funds smartly and to address longstanding inequities rather than just putting it into the fire, police, and trash services, which are important as well, of course. But if we can get to addressing those root causes of challenges, then that will have longer term impact. So those are a couple. I'm also running a randomized control trial of cash transfer to youth who are at risk of committing gun homicides. So really high risk youth, where the Secretary of Health and Social Services for the state that we're working in, when she came into office, she came into a city that has one of the highest youth gun violence rates in America, actually the highest, twice that of Newark and Chicago, and said, well, what have we been doing to fix this? We've been doing after school programming. It clearly isn't working. Let's try something new. So she was like, I want to give these kids money. Maybe the problem is that they don't have enough money in their pocket to, eat food before they go to school, or their parents can't pay rent. So they're like hopping around to places, or whatever it is that, causes challenges for youth to be able to engage in pro-social behaviors and attend school and get jobs and all that kind of stuff. So she engaged with a colleague of mine and who came to me and said, we want to study this rigorously. So we're randomizing and giving kids cash and seeing what happens. So all sorts of really different, cool types of projects. Those are just a couple. So again, I'll stop there, but feel free to ask any more questions about any of these in particular, or any that I didn't mention that you've seen on my CV or anything like that.
Yeah, cool. So my colleagues are going to get a chance to chime in with their questions, but I wanted to get a little bit of a timeline from you as to how you got involved in the work that you're doing. Usually when people think of economists, what we see on TV are these big suited up, typically white older men on Wall Street in New York making a whole lot of money. And it seems as if their view of the world it's just focused on them. And so we typically have this notion of that's what an economist look like. How did you in your journey get involved and have a heart towards this type of work? And what did that look like for you? And how could we as future economists and analysts decenter ourselves to incorporate this type of communal view when it comes to economy and equitable work, the work that you're doing?
That's a great question. I mean, I can see how economists have that perception broadly, especially from television and social media. There are many wonderful economists out there. The ones who just won the Nobel Prize in economics have contributed so greatly to this real world on the ground research to help real people. So it's nice to see the field kind of moving in that direction from like abstract theories that may or may not ever end up helping people to like real on the ground work that's responsive to needs. Of course, those theories oftentimes set the stage for for like real impact. But okay, so I'm going down a winding path. But that being said, I think I think sometimes academia can create challenges with allowing economists to really pursue equity and inclusion and policy research that's on the ground. And so not that you can't do it within the academic world, but sometimes it's harder because a lot of times the questions that policymakers or nonprofit leaders or whoever else have that they need answered, you can't answer them in a clear, perfectly, with a perfect identification strategy and a perfect data set. And you just have to do the best with what's out there. And that doesn't always get published in academic journals, right? So I think that trying to put yourself in a university department that values research that is responsive to needs and based on equity and things like that, and or trying to put yourself in a job that values that is super important. And that can help. So sometimes it's just the institutional structure in which you're in that impedes your ability to focus on what you believe to be important and what you think can really help people who need it the most. So my personal path to get there, like I said, I went to a typical university for undergrad, but I was influenced by a Jesuit professor there. I'm not even Catholic, and this professor took me under his wing and encouraged me to kind of think about equity and poverty, encouraged me to join the Peace Corps after college. So I went to the Peace Corps, and that really shaped my, future thinking around all of this. And then again, I switched out of the international work purely for personal reasons of, wanting to settle down and get married and have kids and all that kind of stuff. But I think the same issues and challenges apply whether you're doing international development work or development work here in the US. I think almost all of the questions that economists ask can be viewed through the lens of equity and should be. And so again, like I'm lucky enough to work at a place where that is our lens for everything. But I think you can bring that lens into anywhere you work. Go to work at Facebook or Amazon or wherever you're going to work, you can always incorporate that equity lens into work.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so now I'm going to open the floor up to my colleagues here. And the first question comes from Iowa. Guys, I do want to say, if you are going to ask your question, please stand up so that Christina is able to know who you are. And it's not just a voice that's floating in the audience. So the first question comes from Myla.
Okay, yeah. Good afternoon, Christina.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Yeah, please, I would just like to know what the career path is for somebody who's interested in economic research, like where you started from, and you explained earlier you're doing a lot of projects right now. So what's the career path for
like long-term career path? You mean like moving forward from where you're at? Yeah. Well, I mean, I think first of all, getting your master's in quantitative economics is a great start. Coming into any job with some of those quant skills is super important from my perspective. Of course, there's a lot of jobs that use qualitative methods, and those are great as well. And at Urban, we do a lot of mixed methods of qual and quant. But anyway, where you guys are all starting from is a wonderful starting point. And I think there's a million different paths. I'm lucky enough to also be married to an economist, so I can give you kind of two different kinds of paths. You would, I think at your level with a master's degree at a place like Urban, you would come in as an analyst at the analyst level. And you would, do all sorts of work on projects, everything from managing projects, writing proposals, doing the data work, doing field work, whatever is required of it. Also probably doing some interviews and focus groups, which if you haven't done yet, don't be afraid of those. Those are a great way to inform quantitative research and to help ensure that you're really understanding the data properly. And then you would continue up the career path to leading your own projects and getting to really design your own suite of work. You might, I came into Urban with a different idea of what I wanted to study. When I was doing my PhD, I was mostly studying issues with cities that are losing population. So urban depopulation and financial stress of cities like Detroit and other cities in Michigan. And when I came to Urban, I got put on, or initially was brought into a bunch of different types of projects. And I ended up really finding my passion in other areas. So I think, you just have to be open to the opportunities that come your way and choose the best ones as they come. And there's a million different paths you can take. You can go into, you don't necessarily have to do research, right? You could use your data skills to go do like applied work within a local government, or, you could go work for a local housing agency and help them with analytics to that, affordable housing developments get put in the highest opportunity neighborhoods, or you could go work for a private company and help them figure out ways to, I don't know, let's see, Amazon is, I keep coming back to the affordable. I work a lot on affordable housing as well, but Amazon HQ2 is coming in near us, and they're doing a lot of investments in the local community to make sure that that their new development doesn't displace low-income families. So there's a million different paths you can take. And my path was winding and twisted and ended where it ended, just by really continuing to focus on those values and the core things I believed in. And my husband, similarly, he's an economist. He works at the World Bank. And he took a different path to get there too. He went to a couple different jobs and ended up there. So I don't know if that answered your question specifically, but all the paths are different.
Cool. Thank you. You got into it a little bit, Tina, before, but our next question is coming from Shivanji.
Hi Tina, I'm Shivangi. How are you?
Hi, nice to meet you.
So like you mentioned a little bit about the research you did during your PhD, and I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more about it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so when I was in my PhD, I started my first year doing international development, actually like rural agriculture work in Zambia. So that could be more different than what I do now. But when I came back, I was in Zambia for a couple months that year, and I came back and I decided I kind of wanted to switch to domestic work just because while I was, while I was over there for those couple months, like, a sibling had a baby and, a family member had an illness and all those things. And I just decided I wanted to be closer to family and stuff. When I came back, I looked into the different like topics within my department that I could switch to. And I ended up deciding to go work for our state and local government extension program, which goes out into the state and local government and helps to assist with various different data challenges that states and localities were facing. So as part of that work, I had been working in the city of Saginaw, Michigan with some fiscal challenges. And they had brought up this issue that they had with vacant buildings and crime being like really centered in these vacant buildings, and they'd been demolishing them. And they said, it'd be really great to know, like, does demolishing these buildings actually affect crime rates in a neighborhood? And I was like, oh, that's something I could study. So I spent many days in the basement of Saginaw City Hall collecting data by hand from paper documents about demolitions in the city. Geocoded all of those, and then did an analysis of the impact of vacant building demolitions on crime at the neighborhood level, and found that demolishing a vacant building does reduce crime within the direct vicinity of a house. I've come to believe more in the long term that we should be addressing more of the root causes of crime rather than things like that, but an impact in the short run as well. So, and then in my program, we wrote 3 essays as part of our dissertation. That was my main one. I also did 2 other essays on municipal residency requirements. So this idea, again, of cities that are losing population and challenging, it's so hard to provide city services when your population is declining, your property value tax base is declining, you don't have enough money to like pick up trash, and it just keeps getting worse and worse, right? It's a downward spiral. So one thing that cities have attempted to do is require their employees to live within the city boundaries, one, to increase property values within the city, but then there's other benefits as well, right? Like you would think that maybe if a police officer lives in the neighborhood that they work, then they'll know the community, they'll be closer to it. It'll just be better all around. So I did a couple of studies on that as well, but really it was mostly focusing on the demolition work at that time.
Thank you. Cool. Our next question is coming from Rachel.
Hi Tina.
Hi.
Thanks so much for speaking with us. You've already given us a couple interesting examples of the outside stakeholders that you personally work with at Urban. And there's such a variety there. I'm just wondering, what's exciting about working with so many different stakeholders, and what is challenging about it?
Oh, great question. Yeah, I feel like I've been really lucky this year to get even more engagement with all sorts of different types of stakeholders. I'll tell you, my favorite are community organizers. By far my favorite types of people to work with. So community organizers, we try to do a lot of community engaged research, which means that like centering community members in the design of research. So rather than research questions coming from like me sitting in my room by myself, like pondering the state of the world and thinking about things, actually like going out and working with communities to help identify challenges and research to solve those challenges. So definitely working with community stakeholders is my favorite. I've been trying to incorporate it into every single project that I can, have a community advisory board that oversees the work all the way along. And again, those would vary by project, but often includes a lot of neighborhood leaders, organizers, all those kinds of folks. And then you get all the way up to, city leaders and political leaders, which is also really fun. So for instance, tomorrow, Friday, I get to present to I'll keep it vague again, just for the purposes of anonymity, to a city council, to a whole city council, the mayor and the manager at their city council retreat. It's another city outside of where I live, somewhere else. They've requested that I speak to them about inclusionary zoning, which is work that I've been doing, you know, to help improve housing affordability. I won't go into the details of that, but so as part of that, you know, I get to speak to a whole city council a couple months implementing an inclusionary zoning policy. So I really get to influence their decision making around how it's designed, who it affects, how can you like make sure it focuses on equity, all of those things. So being able to like actually influence policy and then seeing in a couple months when I get to see that policy be passed, it's like that's the best part of our job, I think, is when you feel like your work is really directly influencing policy. So and the way I was asked to do that was because I had a relationship. I had the opportunity to build a relationship with the city manager of that city through some other work where I asked him to be on the project advisory group for a project. And then he came back and said, hey, can you come talk to our city council about that? So I think this community engaged approach of really engaging community throughout the whole life cycle of a project helps to ensure that your research makes a difference and affects policy and practice on the ground or advocacy and organization efforts.
That's really cool. I just want to follow up a little bit on what you said there. What are the main differences between, you know, the community stake, like as far as the details of working on a particular project, what are the biggest differences you notice with working with community stakeholders versus the political ones?
Well, of course, with political stakeholders, there's a lot of politics involved, right? So you have to always be careful of, you know, when I'm talking to a more conservative group, I tend to find the evidence around policies around how it'll affect the economy as a whole or how it'll affect, you know, all people. Whereas if I'm talking with a more left-leaning organization, I tend to focus more on the effects on people, the individuals who it's directly affecting. But there's always some sort of, don't touch on this topic, it's really sensitive right now, there's big fights over it, or don't even mention that word because it's a non-starter, it's never going to happen. And so just the politics behind it, you know, there's always politics. As long as you're, you have to be sensitive to those, I've learned over the years. And so there's politics. The community organizer side, you know, there's a lot of politics and drama within communities as well. We have a project we're doing where it's true participatory based research, where we are training residents with low incomes within a community to actually do the research themselves for their community. Everything from deciding upon what the research questions are to doing it and conducting it. We train them and help them do it. And there's a community advisory board on that project. And we know that there's politics within the people who were selected to be on that board. And some people feel it's representative, others don't. So there's always going to be challenges and sensitivities with that. But I think with all of these groups, the most important thing is that you have to build trust and relationships before you can do anything, before you can get anything done. So that I really appreciate that Urban allows us the opportunity, affords us the opportunity to build relationships and all of that within our work.
Cool. All right, the next question is coming from Michael.
Hi, Tina. I'm Michael Gobreski, and I have a more specific question about some of the research you've done regarding your local zoning and affordable housing. So my background is actually in environmental engineering. And so when I read that you work in zoning laws, I immediately thought, so currently, obviously, you don't build a housing zone where a floodplain is, but as we've seen with climate change, there are higher, more intense rain events, and so floodplains are often expanding. And I was wondering if, and then oftentimes encompassing the housing zone. And I was wondering if you came across that in any of your research where housing prices might be dropping in a certain area, but it's not necessarily that you want more people moving in there due to higher risks within the zone.
That's such an interesting question. And I might not answer it exactly what you asked, just because this isn't exactly my area of specialty, but just like talking on that topic a little bit, it's an interesting balance and challenge when you are balancing out affordability challenges with environmental challenges, right? Because say, yeah, I'll give my neighborhood, for example. I worked with my city government to adopt an accessory dwelling unit regulation, which means that like houses can put in small, tiny homes in the backyard or in their house, right? Make an apartment. Now, a challenge with that, right, is you're increasing the impermeable surface, right? And we have flooding problems in my town in Alexandria. And so that can be a challenge. And sometimes environmental goals are not compatible with affordability, inclusion, and equity goals, right? However, that may seem that way at a small level, right? If you take a step back and say, what is one of the major drivers of climate change? Like urban sprawl, like long transportation, like people commuting really far, all the stuff that comes along with us all having big single family homes with a yard, which I have one, so I'm blaming myself as well. But so really in the bigger picture, addressing those root causes of climate change, redensifying our cities, making more public transit available so that we're not driving everywhere, all of those things can in the longer run affect those. So I think we really just need to blend them together and say, okay, in the short run, yes, let's create increased density projects that don't harm the floodplains and don't harm the other environmental challenges that we have, or minimize that in the short run, right? Like by requiring permeable driveways and whatever else we can do, while also recognizing that in the long run, one of the best things we can do is being more dense and getting rid of urban sprawl, right? So, and then all the other ways that we can address climate change as well. But I think this tension, and this also raises a point about, we just have such siloed policy programs, research, everything, right? Like we've got people doing environmental research. We've got like city committees that focus on environmental issues, and we've got city committees that focus on equity and housing affordability. And yeah, they talk to each other, but really they should be together, right? Because they should go hand in hand. And so working together more towards common goals and making sure that, you know, the environmental goals where we're requiring every house to be or every apartment complex to be LEED certified and blah, 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 which then increases the cost of construction and reduces the housing supply overall, leading to less equity and inclusion. You know what I mean? Like working together so that we can build public transit with high density buildings nearby and and make the best decisions as a whole. Breaking down those silos, I think, is one way we have to use to get there.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Thank you. And our next person to ask a question is Yushi.
Hi, Tina. I'm Isidro. My question is kind of broad, different from Michael. It has two parts. So we know you have done a lot of research. So based on your own research experience, in your dictionary, what's your definition for research? And what is a good data? What is a good data analyst in your mind? Thank you.
Oh, that's such a good question. I should have prepped more for that one. Research. I don't know that I've ever thought about that. I guess research is really anytime you're applying rigorous data methods, and by data, I mean qualitative or quantitative, interviews, focus groups, quantitative survey, administrative data, anytime you're applying rigorous methods to evaluate policies or programs, or better understand, this is a hard one, better understand the world in which we live, I guess. I think that would qualify as research. I mean, I guess you'd also have to say theoretical research where you're working on theories to help explain the world, that would also be included. So it doesn't have to be empirical by any means. I do all empirical research, so that's what I think of. But so I think all of that would fit under research. I would hope that most research is rigorous. Not what we see, you know, people on social media saying, I did my research, you know, like literally, you know, rigorous research with evidence and sampling procedures that are appropriate and sample sizes that are appropriate to draw conclusions. I think I would consider research. And then what would be a good analyst? I mean, I think anyone who, you know, truly believes in their work and tries their best to answer questions with the most rigor possible, and with the best tools available to them, I think would be what I think the best researchers are, best analysts are. So if you have the passion and you're willing to learn new things and be open to being wrong, I think that you'll make great researchers.
Cool. And our final question on paper, everyone else, you're still willing to ask a question whenever it comes up, but it comes from Sam. Oh, Sam left. Okay, well, I'll ask this question for him. I didn't know, I can't really see anyone up there, but Sam wanted to ask, what tools do you rely on to do your daily work?
Like all sorts of tools. Let's see, coffee. No, so let's see. I like Stata. That's going to be the first tool that's gonna pop into my mind. Of course, the youngins are pushing me to use more R, which is better, I know. But so both of those are good tools. Let's see. I mean, we use Excel a lot, right? For day-to-day, like figuring out some budgets and project management and all that kind of stuff. We use so community engaged tools. That's like a more abstract tool, but all sorts of a whole toolkit of methods to ensure that your research is community-based and focused. There's a whole great page on that on the Urban website if you want to learn more about community engaged research. Qualitative tools, listening, asking the right questions, really trying to make sure that my own unconscious biases aren't shaping the way I interpret things, and instead really ensuring that the findings are the findings, and I'm letting the data and the data, again, including both quant and qual, speak for itself, and giving community an opportunity to ensure that we're interpreting things properly. Other tools. I'm trying to think. We use a lot of management tools, like we use Jamis to manage our budgets and our project staff time and all of that stuff. It's a great tool. So all of the kind of institutional tools within Urban that help us be more efficient and spend our time wisely. I think those are the main ones.
Nice, nice. So you do a lot of interesting work, a lot of hard work, a lot of work that takes heart and passion, like you said. It can oftentimes be a little sad. I know me and you talked, and emotionally it can be a little bit rigorous to deal with. How are you handling yourself and your own health and the health of your family as you tackle some of these issues, especially during COVID, with so many people not being able to access their families or access different things and resources? So how have you been handling all of this?
Gosh, that's such a good question. I'm almost like getting emotional thinking about it. It is hard. Like when we were doing the randomized controlled trial with youth that I mentioned, we were about halfway through it when COVID hit and we had to cancel it. So we had to tell these kids who are, extremely vulnerable youth that we had to take resources away from them at the time when they needed it most. That was terrible. It was horrible. But having supportive teammates and having supportive funders who say, okay, well, we're going to do the best we can to help them. We're going to do the best we can to help youth guys through this. And we're going to redo this next year. We're going to give you a whole new grant to redo it next year. So there's hope and possibility for the future. I tend to think our work is more hopeful. So while it can be a lot of like challenging problems, we're always focused on solutions. So it's not as depressing as it might sound. It feels more like motivating than challenging. So I'll give an example again. I'm going to keep this anonymous so that in case you want to post this. I was on a call with a local partner a couple of weeks ago about some work we're doing in their city. And he said, hold on, I'm getting a phone call. Can I take this? And we can get back on Zoom in a couple of minutes. I said, okay. So got off, got back on, and he said, he looked a little upset, and I was like, oh, I hope everything's okay. And he said, well, it's like, not really, unfortunately, one of my family members was just involved in a shooting. And I was like, oh my God. And he's like, and unfortunately he was the shooter. And I was like, oh, that is heavy. And he looked down for a second, he looked up at me and he said, and that's why we do this work. That's why we're doing what we're doing. So in that case, obviously it was depressing and very sad. And I like started crying on a call with a partner because I, you know, mom hormones. Once you have kids, that just happens. I don't know if any of y'all are parents. But it was motivating and inspiring to say, yes, like this is so important. What we are doing is so important on a day-to-day basis. So it's really more motivating than anything else. But I will say self-care, nonetheless, super important during COVID, especially with working from home and I mean, I know I was super stressed about the health of family members, my parents, my kids throughout all of this too, you know, and I had to take care of myself. Doing anything you need to do to make sure that you are taking care of your own personal health and well-being as well. And at a place like Urban, again, I love it there because we do really value work-life balance. So I work 40 hours a week. I stop, you know, when I have to go pick up my kids, I turn my phone off and I don't look at it again until the next day. I'm very disciplined about that, and Urban supports that and people understand that. And so I think it's, again, really important to find the right job where you feel like they value your personal life. If I have a kid if I got a call right now on my phone that said, you know, your kid is sick, come pick them up, I would just say, oh, I got to run. And all my teammates would understand and they would take over whatever I was supposed to be doing and fix it. And so having the support of a good team or a good work environment is really important for that. But just take care of yourselves, do whatever you need to do. I mean, I personally, exercise and I like to play soccer, and I did see a therapist for a while to help with the anxiety and stress of all of this, and there's no shame in that. So take care of yourself in any of the work that you do.
Nice.
I have a slightly related question. I appreciate your honesty and candor about that, but as we are going towards hopefully recovering from COVID, what are some things that you see urban challenges that policymakers will have to clearly address? And is there anything that we can do to, even though we're not directly involved in policy, but to make sure that there's things that we can do as recovery happens? Because I feel like if the work we put in now will have much more effort than before COVID, where things kind of can get compounded better.
Yes, great question. Absolutely. Get involved as a citizen in your own local government. Go to city council meetings, voice your opinion about how ARPA and other funds are being spent. Look at those city budgets, look at those allocation plans for dollars, respond to surveys. I know I personally had this reckoning probably 4 or 5 years ago. I realized I do all this work and I'm not engaged at all in my own community. I was and I need to be. So I cold emailed our mayor and just said, hey, I'm an economist at the Urban Institute. I live up the street from this neighborhood that I'm worried about gentrification, displacement. Do you know, are there plans for how to preserve affordable housing in that neighborhood? He wrote back within 2 minutes, offered to meet with me. He met with me for 2 hours, discussed all of housing policy in our city, got me on our affordable housing developers nonprofit, put me in touch with all these other people, the city people. I'm now doing all these projects in my community. I volunteer with a couple different groups, really got engaged with my own community. So I think that's a great way to influence policy on the ground. Get engaged, advocate for good policy that's inclusive and equitable. A lot of times at community meetings, it's just high income homeowners, and there's not much representation from people from other income brackets or from renters or from people of color. And so, really raising the visibility, raising the voices of those who aren't in those meetings is super important. So getting engaged at that level. Then I'd have to think about, obviously at the city and policy level, we're trying to encourage cities, to really think about policies and programs that can address those root causes of inequities. So I know I already mentioned this, and I can send you guys all the info that we're doing on those. But I think at your own level, just get engaged with your own community. Go out, meet your local organizers, meet your city council representatives, get engaged however you can and try to influence policy that way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm Kofi Mensah, and nice to meet you as well. I would like to know, especially with your interest in inequality, looking at the research you've done over the period, which sector do you think maybe is improving or maybe is widening? And if it's improving, then we want to know, like, maybe you can share a bit about a policy that you think in that particular sector is improving the inequality gap. And then the second one would be for research, like we hope to be doing some future research or data analysis. At what point, maybe, can you share with us any experience where your research was rejected? And what was the outcome? What has been the experience, and any advice?
Sure.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I get stuff rejected all the time. So don't feel bad when that happens. In fact, I got a rejection from a journal last week. So yeah, so on the first one, great question. Unfortunately, most of the things I can think of right now are worsening. I do know that there's recent research from my colleagues showing that poverty actually, was it poverty? Gosh, I can't remember the exact measure they use, but one measure of either poverty or inequity actually reduced during COVID because of our federal response and because of all the safety net investments that we put into that, because of the eviction moratorium, the rent relief, and all those things. We actually saw some improvement during one of the worst crises of our nation. So that's encouraging. And I think that was a lot of direct support to individuals that did that. I'll also mention that, I mean, I think on the housing front, things are getting worse. They might get better soon. We've seen a lot of movement to the suburbs as people don't want to be in, you know, cramped apartment buildings. And so that's raised housing pressures in the suburbs and has, you know, started to put gentrification displacement pressures on a lot of lower income households in the suburbs. We might see some affordability improvements in central cities because of that. My personal take is that people are going to move back into cities when this is over, maybe not at the same rates, but all in all, the housing affordability is worse than it's ever been. And so I think we really need to address those challenges through zoning reforms, direct investments in affordable housing, and other safety nets that can help families not be spending, you know, half of their income on housing and just sacrificing so many other, you know, opportunities for their kids and for themselves because of that wasted cost and the location in which they have to live, which might be way too far from opportunity. So in the housing realm, I think we're getting worse. I will say there's been a lot of really promising evidence around cash transfers and guaranteed income. So not necessarily universal basic income where everyone gets money, but guaranteed income that's targeted towards low income people. There's a new study out of Stockton, California, new research out of a cash transfer study in Stockton, California, showing that, you know, all the benefits we would assume would come from low-income families getting cash every month, extra cash every month that they can spend how they'd like, all the benefits you would assume, right? Like reduced financial stress, improved health and well-being. But I think what's really interesting that they found there is that they found that people who received the cash worked more and got better jobs, which is completely counter to most people's arguments against guaranteed income programs. So I think that gives us really powerful tool for advocating for that. I like guaranteed income programs because I think that a lot of the ways that we distribute safety net dollars to residents in the US is kind of patronizing because we tell them how they should spend it. You know, people know how to spend their money. I certainly spend my money on things I shouldn't spend them on, like Halloween decorations and things like that. So I think that we should be respectful and it's showing that it works. There's a lot of cash transfer pilots going on in the country. So I think that's really promising. I also am very excited that there's been at least one reparations program. And that's a tricky topic. I won't go too far down that line, but I think it's good to see that that's starting to take form as well.
Okay, another question that we had from Sam, and he wanted to get this out. What is the hiring outlook for analysts in the nonprofit world? Can we get our foot in the door with an MQE degree and should plan to pursue additional education in some specific policy area like housing or transportation?
Yes, you can definitely get your foot in the door. Come apply to Urban. We've got analyst positions open right now in my center. Apply. I think having those quant skills coming in, you know, you may want to work for a couple of years and you may decide, I do want to go get a PhD or I want to go try, you know, a different job or whatever it is, but you can definitely get your foot in the door with a master's in quantitative economics. again, I'm speaking mostly for urban. I don't know about all different types of places, but I would encourage you to go work for a little bit and then consider the PhD. PhDs aren't for everybody. It's a trade-off, right? Because if you do know you want to get a PhD, go do it before you have kids and all that stuff. But otherwise, like you can definitely get a good job and make a difference with the master's degree that you guys are getting. So come apply to be on my team. Samora, I know I already told you to do that, but others as well. Did I answer your whole question? I feel like there was a second one I missed.
No, he just said what's the hiring outlook for analysts in nonprofit areas?
We need people. I will tell you, I know that the nation as a whole is having similar challenge. We need it's good at Urban. We need to hire a lot of people. So I don't know about other organizations, but during COVID, there was a slowdown in, we work all on soft money on grants and contracts from outside folks. So during COVID, there was a little bit of a slowdown in funding as a lot of foundations and other organizations redirected their funds towards immediate short-term COVID relief, as makes sense, rather than like longer-term research like what we do. Now that's all coming back full force, and we're seeing tons and tons of contracts and grants coming through. We're winning a lot of them, and we are hiring. We need a lot of help. So at least where I am, the outlook is good. So get out there and look around, find your dream job, and fight for it.
I do want to echo the other part of Sam's question. Sorry. When I think he was touching on, we'll have these. Can you hear us? Okay, for me, okay?
Kind of. It's like a little fuzzy.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think what Sam's second part of the question was getting at was, we have this quantitative skill set that will come out of our program with, but for folks that want to enter the policy world, we might not have as strong of an understanding of housing policy or labor issues. So do you think that's something, you can just walk into the industry with some quant skills and pick up the actual environment of the policy you're working within, or do you think that would be difficult?
I do think you can. The question is, it might be harder to get hired without that like keyword on your resume,
Yeah.
For us, at Metro, at Urban, it's like, well, have they worked on things that are related to our topic areas? So having some experience or a project or an internship or whatever in the topic area of the place that you're applying for is probably necessary, really. But that being said, like learning the institutional features, all of the stuff within it. I mean, I've done that all on the job. When I started Urban, I didn't know anything about affordable housing. I learned it all here, so I think you can learn that as you go. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about being more of a quantitative researcher is that you can apply those skills to any topic. And I mean, most recently, somebody at Urban put out we're gonna, put out an email, send out an email saying we want to apply to this project on early childhood care supply chains and why daycare is so expensive. And I was like, does anyone want to work on this? And I was like, you know what? I know nothing about this, but I have kids and I have always wondered about this. I was like, yeah, I'll help out. We just won like a gigantic grant to do this. And now I get paid to go learn about it because I have the quant skills that are useful for the project. Whereas if I didn't have those quant skills, I might not be selected for that project because you need to have more of the topical knowledge or at least more of the qualitative skills. So and another one, a colleague in our Justice Policy Center asked me if I would co-PI a study on racism and policing. And I was like, absolutely. I don't know anything like really technical about it other than what I read in the news, but I'm very excited to like learn about and get to research what I think is probably the most important topic in our country, So I think having quantitative skills allows you to be open to all sorts of different projects and people want you on their projects. And so again, I can't emphasize enough there are all different types of skills you can use to go out and change the world. And before I got my PhD, I felt like I knew a lot, but I didn't have any of those skills to make a change. And so I went down the quantitative research route and it's been great. I mean, there's all sorts of other types of skills to make a change in the world, but I think this one worked out for me as long as you definitely want to do research. There's of course a whole world out there of like more implementation, more practice that you don't necessarily need quant skills for. But quant skills open up the opportunity in the research world to really study any topic and learn about it as you go.
Tina, I have one question about the randomized control study, because you touched on it a little bit about telling people how to manage their money, especially poor folks who need it. Is there a difference between telling them how to manage their money or actually giving them the resources to know how? So does the trial have that component to it where you're teaching financial management, or did you guys leave that out entirely, or what does that look like?
That's a great question. And it's funny because I've done 2 prior randomized control trials on financial education. So I can also speak from those as well. But so our study has 3 treatment arms. We are drawing on work that's been done, not randomized and a little bit like less of a large sample size, that showed that when you give youth money, they don't spend it badly, right? That was the first fear of everyone. Oh, we're going to give them money and they're going to go spend it on guns and drugs or whatever. There's a lot of research out there that shows that's not true. So, the first rule of research is do no harm, right? So we don't want to do anything that could potentially cause harm. So we were pretty certain and convinced through the research that it's not going to do any harm to the kids, right? So we have 3 treatment arms. We have one arm of kids that's just getting money, $150 a week, which is a lot of money for a 14-year-old. Another group that's getting after school programming with financial education components. There's also jobs training, entrepreneurship training, social emotional training, all sorts of things like that in that after school programming, but financial education is a part of that. And then the control group who they'll be getting the programming after the study's over. So yes, we have some of that component, and we'll get to see whether programming plus cash, how that works versus cash alone. Programming is very expensive. Programming like that is plagued with low participation rates. And so that's another reason we're trying to pay them to attend programming. Maybe that will help lower barriers to getting there. But there's also a world of research out there on financial education more broadly, which I'll try not to go down a whole rabbit hole in. But the idea of like financial coaching, where you help people set goals and you work with them to achieve them. To me, I see that as totally different from saying, okay, I'm going to give you, I'm the federal government, I'm going to give you this cash that you can only spend on X. Like you're a mom, I'm going to tell you whether you can spend it on formula or whether you have to breastfeed or whatever. Like ours doesn't do that. That's not really the way our policy works. But financial coaching and education, or like home ownership coaching and counseling before someone buys a home, those things are definitely different, and won't go into the details of coaching works better than like an 8-hour-long classroom course where they're teaching you about decisions you're not going to make for another 20 years. But financial coaching is definitely a good way to help people manage finances better, for sure.
Cool. Another question, your career has been pretty long and you've gotten involved in so many great projects. What's been one of the biggest challenges that you have overcome, maybe like in the past 2 years or so, that has motivated you even more to continue the work that you're doing?
Good question. I mean, I think the biggest challenge was when we had to cancel our study because of COVID. That was really hard. But again, like the support of our funder and our partners to redo it, to allow the youth who were in that original cohort to re-sign up again if they wanted to, and really reaching out and offering support to the youth in any way they could. Our partners doing that was encouraging. And now we're getting to redo this now. We just closed enrollment on Friday, and we're starting to do the baseline surveys now, and programming will start in about a month. So I think, trying to make lemonade from the lemons of COVID and trying to do the best we can. I mean, also thinking about, gosh, all of the inequities that were really just reinforced through COVID. We saw racial gaps in all sorts of metrics expand during COVID because people of color and low-wage workers were disproportionately harmed, disproportionately had to go work in public places, and disproportionately got COVID, right? But now we're seeing a lot of money from the federal government go back to those localities, and hopefully some of that will be used to help address these inequities. So I think we just have to do the best we can and try to find hope in the worst situations. And isn't that a song? I don't know. And yeah, just got to keep pushing forward and try to redo stuff if it doesn't go right the first time.
Okay. Does anyone, I can't tell if anyone has the last question or not. Okay, final question while we're getting towards the end here. From starting your job at Urban 8 years ago, what do you wish that you would have, I'll just ask the question, what do you know now that you wish you would have had known at the start of your career?
Good question. I mean, honestly, I think it's very like specific, but I think I've come to believe that housing and having a safe, stable, and healthy home is probably like one of the most important things for families and for kids. And it took me a long time to learn that and figure that out. So I guess I kind of wish I had known that earlier, so I could have kind of focused on that at an earlier phase. But honestly, I wouldn't change anything. I feel like I learned so much from all the work that I've gotten to do. I was on projects I never would have chosen on my own that ended up being my favorite projects ever. So that's another piece of advice for you all. Don't necessarily dismiss opportunities if you don't think they're, your specific idea of what you're looking for, because it might end up being the best opportunity you could have been given. So I guess, yeah, other than having a better appreciation of the importance of living in a good, safe house and neighborhood, I don't think I would change anything. You got to learn it. You got to learn everything on your own path, I think.
Cool. As a Pitt alumna, what is something that you would have told yourself back then during that time to kind of shed a little light on maybe something you could have told yourself back then? Where were you at that time, and how would you have encouraged yourself in getting to where you are now?
That I can answer, and I feel like I would tell myself to do things differently. I would say take more quant classes, learn more coding, get as many quant skills, hard skills as you can, because that's what's going to give you the tools to go out and make difference in the other things you've learned about and care about, right? So just challenge yourself, get as much experience as you can, learn to code in every language you can. Learn to deal with messy data. That's one thing I'm always harping on, is like, we're so often in school given perfectly clean data sets and assignments with that. That's not how the real world works. You often have to like go out and take data that is impossibly messy and figure out what you can do with it. So just get as much quant experience as you can, learn as much from your professors and your peers as you can, and go out and do some real world stuff too. Good internships in the right places.
All right, sounds so good. Thank you, Christina. We want to and we're again taking the time out of your busy schedule to come and speak with us and give us some insights, some career insights, some challenges to challenge ourselves to be more equitable economists and analysts in the future. And so we just really appreciate you coming here again, and thank you so much.
Of course, thank you all for great questions. Come apply to jobs at Urban. Let me know if any of you have any questions or follow-ups, and I'm here. Thanks again. Thanks, Samora.
Thanks. I'll be following up with you.
Sounds good. Talk to y'all later.
All right, bye.